happy Friday. It is very snowy where I'm at today. So if you hear little children in the background, that is my two sons because they have a snow day from school today. But I do want to welcome you to another episode of Mavens of Manufacturing. This is the broadcast series that you all know where we feature powerful women who are in the engineering and manufacturing space, and they are making some big waves here in the industry. So I'm super excited today because with me I have Heather Ball. Hello, Heather. How are you doing?
Good morning. I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yes, thank you for coming on because you just have such an interesting background, and some of the things that you're doing is really interesting to me because we're going to be talking about authenticity today and maybe touch on some emotional intelligence. But I do want to give a shout out to anyone who is joining us today. If you are in the comment section, please drop your comments in. If you have questions for Heather, do not hesitate to put those in the comments as well too. We love that interaction. We love that engagement. But let's start off with you, Heather. Can you give us just kind of an inside look of who you are and how you got involved in engineering and manufacturing and how your journey led to where you are today?
Sure. That's a great question. Where to begin? I went to school for business and enjoyed that a great deal. Was working in the education industry, managing projects, and ended up being hired in Austin, Texas as an executive for a startup in the construction industry. So the board of directors, Meaghan, that I answered to was a room full of what you would typically think would be a general contractor. Like, I'm talking about the big businesses. This association of general contractors was literally the men that built Dallas and Houston. It was a statewide organization. And these are the men that I answered to at that time in my career in my 20s. And it was a fascinating learning experience to be the female in the room in most cases. And then from there, we had a successful merger from that startup to a nationwide organization. And I went into consulting and advising, but as I grew in mentoring other leaders and working as a consultant, I found that my real passion was coaching, being able to really get together with great leaders, good leaders who wanted to be great, right? They're like, I love business, I love leading my team, but there's just some way in which I'm not quite getting to that excellent stage of my profession or path in my leadership. And what I found was as a woman and as my personality is very in tune with other people's emotion. That's just kind of the way I'm built. But my brain is very analytical. Like the startup that I ran was, I managed the software development, the hardware that had to go into place to build this business that we were running. And so I found myself mentoring and coaching leaders to bridge that gap between the analytically minded and the emotional intelligence that it takes to be a great leader. And so that's what I do now.
That's really cool. So one of the things that just popped in my head, because you use two different words, you use mentorship and then coaching. And is there a difference between those two? Like, is it kind of along the same thing? Because in our industry, I know there's a lot of like push for women to get mentors and help them guide them through so that they can start reaching some of those leadership positions that, you don't see us often in a male dominated industry. Right. So I just want to make sure that everyone's clear on what a mentor is versus what coaching is. Is it kind of the same thing? Is it the same thing? Are they synonymous with each other? Or is there a little bit of a difference between the two?
I think it depends, but I'll give you my experience. So when I use it in that context, I was thinking paid and unpaid, right? So I mentored people who look up to me And then when someone hired me to coach them, I would be mentoring them to improve themselves as a leader. But in a practical sense, what I find might be, in my experience as a paid coach, I took it very seriously that you have paid me to improve your leadership. So I am going to hold nothing back. Whereas with my mentors, I may be just a little bit gentler. And, if they ask the question, I might input, okay, here's some things where I see where you could do better, or here's some, feed forward information. With an executive who has it going on, they know they need to level up. They can't see what's in their blind spot. I'm more out front with it, right? It's like, you need to look here. I've interviewed your staff. I've interviewed the people that answer to you. I've interviewed the people who are contributing, the individual contributors that you have nothing to do with. And I've gathered this information, and here are some things we need to work on. What do you think about that? Does that feel right? And almost always they're like, oh, that's what it is, right? And it's like, how do I put that into practice? How do I get better?
So how did you gain that credibility, though? Because I know that within some of the conversations that I've had with other women who are in engineering and manufacturing, it takes them quite a bit of time to gain because this has been such a male-dominated industry for a long time. It can take some women quite a bit of time to gain that trust or respect from their male colleagues. And it sounds like when I don't want to say you were thrown in with the sharks, but at 20 years old and you're the only woman in the room, that can be pretty intimidating. And you kind of have to have like a certain type of personality to shine through that and get people to trust you right away. And I find, like, with me, when I'm trying to get a story from someone, and we're going to be talking about this a little later on, like the importance of active listening. Like, what were some of the things that you did or kept in mind or had to consider to really get the guys to trust you and have you help them become a better leader, if that makes sense?
It does. And I'm thinking back, and I still engage in this now, as people call, and we try to figure out if it's a good fit for a coach-client relationship. But I would say initially, like when I was growing into those leadership positions. So first thing, Meaghan, I mean, really in any situation where you're the minority or you're the underdog, you just got to bring your best game, right? You gotta be all out in doing your best so that it's undeniable. So I think that's the first thing, is bring your A game. And the second thing is a little bit harder, and it's a little more elusive. And that is, and we'll talk a little bit about this in authenticity, rather than that fake it till you make it approach. I mean, you kind of do to an extent, like everybody's learning. So you have to kind of know that you can do it before you've done it, of course. But I think one of the mindsets that I always had, and I think my mother taught me this, that really served me well, was just that the other person in the room is just a person. Like that CEO that built the high rises of Dallas that I'm in the room with, and I'm about to ask him for a pay raise or a promotion. He's just a guy, right? Like my brother, like my dad, like my uncle. He's just a guy. And so I think that mentality, but going into authenticity, which is what we'll get to a little bit later, knowing also in humility that the secretary I pass going into that boardroom, I am no better than her. And the CEO in the boardroom is no better than me. Like, we are human beings. And if we can have that kind of appreciation for one another, I think in your soul, like in your own psyche, it levels that playing field where you can really be authentic.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask these questions a little bit out of order when I initially sent them, because you did say the word authentic. So how do you define authentic leadership?
Wow, that is a really good question. I think as an authentic leader, you have to first know who you are. Like, I think that's a common issue with many people in general, leaders in general, is knowing what your values are, knowing who you are and what you're bringing to the table, and being willing to acknowledge what you can't bring to the table. Right? Like, that's where we fail.
Yeah.
I'm going to pretend I got it all going on, never going to ask for any help.
Mm-hmm.
The people we're leading see right through that.
I love that you pointed that out, because I did have a conversation with a friend of mine on another podcast, and I was telling her, like, you have, like, good leaders know when to pull everyone in, and they know how to communicate with everyone so that they're on the same page, but they also know, like, hey, I'm not going to know everything. That's why you guys are here. That's what makes us a good team, because we can. So they're not going to, like, take in consideration the nomenclature of the different hierarchies. They're not, like, the positions don't matter. It's just that everybody's on the same. They all know what the end goal is, and here's the steps we need to take to get to the end goal. Next step. What are the obstacles? Okay, how can we take, like, come up with a process to get over those obstacles? So I like that you included that. Like, they're going to also be able to admit what they don't know and what they're not good at, and I think that's a great
Exactly.
definition.
Yeah. And that's why you hire great people, right? Like, that's why your team is diverse and is intelligent and hardworking.
Yeah, absolutely. So in your throughout your experience and your situations of, like, working with leaders, is there a common theme or, like, common challenges that they face? Like, what have been some of the biggest challenges or obstacles leaders in manufacturing in particular face?
Sure. I think it's interesting because a lot of times people will hire me because I have an MBA from the University of Texas and I have a lot of business leadership experience. But what's really fun, and I know this going into it, it's kind of funny because they'll talk about their problems, right? And we need better strategy and we need these other things. And maybe they do. I love strategy workshops, a lot of fun. But the way I do it is a lot of fun. Anyway, but what I find when I get in there so often, Meaghan, is they're having serious communication breakdowns. And I find one of the primary reasons for that is this lack of emotional intelligence, self-awareness, situational awareness, self-control, right? I've got all of these emotions. We're missing our goals, our milestones, and I'm frustrated. Okay, well, do you realize all of the damage you're doing with these frustrated emotions that are falling out on your people? Or, whatever the thing is, there's many different situations. It could just be a great leader who's not hearing his people. But I find, especially in these kind of technical fields, manufacturing, engineering, those kind of things, this is kind of set aside as, oh, emotions, that's for, home, family, as if there's no emotions in our work life. Like, that's so far from true.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're bringing, and as much as people are like, no, I can separate the two, you're not completely separating the two. You're bringing your home life to work life and vice versa, and it's really important to try to separate them. But and now with all this digital technology, it's really hard to do that.
But even just take the simple example of the sales department versus productivity. Like, the sales department goes out and sells something, and then production is handed the request. You're like, what the heck? Who said we could accomplish this in this time frame, right? So what do you do with those emotions if we're not allowed to deal with emotions at work? And so even those kind of things inhibit our communication. And without great communication, we have a difficulty coming together as a team and producing great work, great books.
So let's stay on the topic of emotional intelligence for a little bit, because I feel, and maybe I'm biased, and that's okay because I'm a woman, but I feel like women are better at relationship building because we have a higher emotional intelligence than men do. And I'm not trying to insult men or like, give them a bad rap. But
Right.
I feel like the reason why we can put empathy and compassion in play is just because that's how we're built. Like, we're built to be that way. So how do I want to word this question? One, why is emotional intelligence important more than ever now, especially within manufacturing and technical fields? Because when I first started out as a technical writer, it was really hard to get engineers to open up and like explain to me what they were doing and why that was important. Like, I don't want to say they were socially awkward, but they were a little socially awkward. And
Right.
I just feel like there is this like steel curtain that a lot of people still have within tech fields. But with the workforce issue that we're facing here in the United States with manufacturing, emotional intelligence keeps coming up as an important thing to discuss, because if we want to recruit more people and retain people,
Right.
we need to understand them as humans and not just treat them as a number. So in your opinion, why is this so important for leaders to understand and start implementing within their communication strategies with their teams?
Well, I'm going to start with what you danced around at the beginning of this comment, which is I agree with you. I believe women are naturally, emotionally, hormonally built to be nurturers. And as a business person, I see that as an opportunity. Oh, this area needs relationships to be nurtured. Okay, well, I'm going to take everything into account, including who's going to be best at nurturing that relationship, or that that team needs inspiration. And not that men can't inspire, of course they can. I'm just saying that as a male-dominated industry, the industrial, the manufacturing, the technical, those kind of things, there's an opportunity missed there when you ignore that, or worse yet, shut it down. I coached one leader one time, and he's like, I have this one female on our engineering team, and she's great at what she does, and she's just always causing trouble and bringing stuff up. And I'm like, okay, I just took it with a grain of salt, coached him a little bit. And I was like, is it true? What do you mean? The things she's saying, are they true? Well, I mean, I don't know. It just causes trouble and people get upset. And I'm like, you have an insider in the team willing to say, here's some problems I think we should deal with. Mm-hmm. And she was willing to speak up about it. And once we did some anonymous surveys and had some interviews and conversations, it's like, okay, here's someone willing to bring up some issues because she sees them and she's a good communicator. And how about listening better and just finding out, okay, what are these stresses? What are these irritants? Does anyone else feel it and see it? Oh, yeah. We're just not saying anything, So it just depends. And I think it's different personalities as well. There are a lot of men out there that are great relationship nurturers. We see great male salesmen, nurturing those relationships. But you can definitely encourage that aspect of the females on your team and listen to them, see, what constructive things they're willing to bring out and talk about, and maybe even give you more detail so that you can fix these problems than maybe someone else who's really engaged and excited about just the technical aspect. Mm-hmm. So I do think there is some opportunity for better communication when you have women on the team.
So let's tap into that too, because with better communication and to be truly authentic, I think this is where active listening ties in. And I feel like some people will start to shut down and just put their hands up in the air and give up. And I'm going to say specifically women, because if we don't feel like we're being heard, then what's the point? Why are we going to keep trying to contribute to the solutions of the problems that we're seeing? So let's talk about active listening. Active listening is, something that when someone is talking to you, you're engaging with them, you're listening with your eyes, you're listening with your ears, you're letting them get what they need out, but you're not listening to respond. You're listening to really understand. So what are some kind of tips or best practices that you offer with, because I always say if you really want to change your work environment, it does start at the top. It needs to start with leadership. So what are some of the best practices or tips or exercises you go through with some of your clients to really help them, not just for themselves be better active listeners, but give them so that they can share that with the rest of their team so that everybody can be better active listeners?
Okay, well, I have a couple of weird ones, and one really easy, powerful one. I'll start with this, is recognizing and leading by example, and then also coaching your team, your other leaders and other employees to recognize that this relationship I have with you is far more important than whether I'm right or not. So if I can get a leader to make that shift, if he can get his middle managers, more importantly, to make that shift, to recognize I can listen to you and acknowledge you and appreciate you, even if I know you're wrong. Like, say I have empirical evidence, you are wrong, Meaghan. You're just way off base. Well, I could come at you like that. Right. Or I could say, tell me more. Why is this important? Because maybe the issue isn't that you think you're right. Maybe the issue is, why is this important to you? Is there something else going on that is creating this communication that is really more important for me to address?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would like to bring up a personal example from that, because I've been in work environment situations where I was told flat out that I was wrong, and it just made me shut down. And I'm like, this is not a learning opportunity. This is really, I feel offended. Like, this is an insult. But one company that I worked for, and I don't know if this matters, but my report was a woman, and she would let me talk through why I made certain decisions. So like, if she didn't agree with me, she didn't tell me that right off the bat. She was just like, well, tell me. And she did exactly what you just said. She's like, well, tell me why you're doing it this way. Why do you think this is going to be more effective? And I would tell her, and she's like, okay, that's interesting. But do you think there's another way or an alternative way where it could be more effective? And I would just sit there and I'm like, and I would be frustrated a little bit, but not because she was telling me I was wrong. She was challenging me, and she was making me think of other ways to do it. So I feel like if you can do it that way, you're helping strengthen your skill set of your employees as well too. Yes. So I think that's interesting that you said it that way, because it works. I think it works, but I don't know if her being a woman had something to do to do with her approach with me, because it wasn't offensive or anything.
I don't know if it does either. I mean, we know great female leaders, and we know great male leaders, and we know poor leaders in both categories as well.
Yeah.
But one of the things that caught my attention when you were talking is I have to coach the leaders and the teams that I coach to understand that this takes time, and it is an investment of time that is so worth it. It's so valuable, and especially manufacturing or tech fields, I see managers jumping to the answer. And to your point, it's so much better. One of the hardest things is leaders have to allow their people to fail. That's how we learn, and to be able to let them work through this problem so that I'm not giving them the answer every single time. A lot of times I'm coaching leaders that are doing that. And they're like, I can't get out of the loop. They don't know what they're doing. Well, you're not letting them do it. You have to let them develop what you were describing, that critical thinking, that looking at different angles of this problem and learning to solve the problems, not just having the answer. Like in calculus, we figured that out. It's like, well, it doesn't do me any good just have the answer. How did we get here?
Yeah, I like that. So then for businesses, and I brought this up before with like recruiting and retaining talent. So right now, a lot of companies are just saying we can't find the talent. Like it's not there. And, for businesses who are struggling with recruitment, but also retention, where would you guide them to start? And what sort of tips would you give them? Because again, I feel like it starts at the top, right? So how can they get younger generations to really get excited about this sector? Like, how does this all tie into our whole industry for us to be better at retaining who we have now, but also getting the attention of younger generations?
Exactly. Right. Well, I loved your guest from last week. I listened to part of that show, and it was really interesting how they were reaching out to younger and younger people. My objectives when I coach a group, depending on how many of the people they're willing to give me, the more the better, because I can get, the view then begins to encompass the whole problem, the whole company. But one of the things that I want them to do is I'm like, you need to create an environment where people go to bed excited to get up tomorrow morning and go to work. And I think a lot of leaders don't recognize that that's even possible, that they're like, well, work is work. You have to do work. No, nobody wants that life. Nobody wants that life. You want people who are excited to get up in the morning and go to work. And one of the quotes that I often quote is Danny Meyer. You might know him from, he established the Shake Shack. I think it's the name of that little burger place. Anyway, he's got restaurants in New York, and he's got a bunch of chain restaurants as well. One of the quotes that is in his book is, you pay for people's time, but they volunteer their attitude, their effort, their enthusiasm, their leadership, right? Like, all you're buying is their time. You have to inspire and draw out of them that best part of themselves. So as in technology or engineering or manufacturing, if you're just out there telling people, hey, I'll buy 45 hours of your time and this is what you get for it, which I think, in better times we could get away with that. But now it's like, no, we have to grow up great leaders, great managers in our organizations to say, we're a team. Our product matters. This is why it matters. This is what we get to do. And if we hit this milestone, we're gonna win. We're gonna be better than this in the marketplace, or we're gonna be able to accomplish these things and do more as a team, as a corporate group, right? And I don't know that some of the more technical industries, like manufacturing, don't often catch that vision.
Yeah, I think they do struggle. What, do you know the name of that book off the top of your head? What's the book?
I don't, but I have it right here because I know I was going to quote him. It's called Setting the Table.
I'm going to include a link to that in the show notes. So then what can you offer on? So one of the things in engineering and manufacturing, there's a statistic out there that's 1 in 4. Hi, puppy. There's a statistic out there where 1 in 4 leaders in manufacturing are women. I'm starting to see refreshing changes, though, where there's more women who are getting into business leadership roles where they're actually owning the business or they're purchasing the business. And we're starting to hear more and more stories of like women getting to like CEO level positions and stuff, which is great. But there's this theory called the broken rung theory. I don't know if you've heard about it before, but it basically says that if a woman misses that first opportunity to get promoted, like if she gets passed up for that promotion, it's really hard for her to get a promotion and climb up the ladder. So what can we do so they're not missing that first rung? Is there a difference in the way that you coach your clients on how to support women in male dominated industries? Like what are there any differences in how they should be communicating with women, how they should be supporting them, how they should be leading them versus how they would be leading their male counterparts?
Well, one of the ways in which I encourage leaders to do that is just be mindful. Like the way you would mentor the men in your company, think about how that applies to the female leaders that are coming up. Are you including them in the same way? Are you, where are you developing those strong relationships with those male counterparts? And how can, and part of that is, leaders just not having the skill set or the experience to bring up those female leaders. And again, that's mindset, right? It's like, okay, stop believing the lies, that you can't honor this relationship, encourage this relationship, and the skill set that this female contributor has, and being able to pour into that in the same way without the baggage of, how do I do this? And I don't know how to relate in this situation. Like they're people again, they're just people. And you encourage her the same way you encourage him, right? Or it should be. And if there's a difference there, then that's where we get into some deep coaching about why do you treat them differently? What's underneath? What's the root of that? And can you get to that place where you see them as equally competent, equally ambitious? And those are things that we coach through. I actually have more male clients than I do female. And it's really interesting because the other thing about my relationship with my male clients is I find them much more vulnerable than they seem to be with other people, with other mentors or other leaders that they're engaging with. And maybe it's that lack of competition is what's been suggested to me. I don't know.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. And so if it is, then is that something that we can look into or look at research and say, okay, how valuable then would it be to have a woman in the room? How valuable would it be then to have that dynamic coming out in a regular business efforts, right? Having that person as a VP to bring in a different insight and to be able to collaborate with her male counterparts in different ways.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because I've had conversations with other individuals in this sector where it has been so competitive for a really long time. Like, and the men in this industry tend to be a little bit more competitive than the women. But you hear stories of older women who have been in the industry for 30 plus years. Initially the whole thought process was like, okay, there's only one chair at the table for us, so then we have to compete with each other instead of just inviting each other to the table. But sales can get ridiculously competitive among some of the people in this sector, which is fine. Like that's how they get business, right? So okay. I think that's such an interesting theory where they're comfortable to talk to you and be vulnerable with you because you don't pose some sort of quote unquote threat. Like,
right.
It's really interesting.
And so what I've heard, I mean, I haven't been a man coaching leaders, and I know some men that coach leaders, but what's been suggested to me is that I don't have to maintain this male persona, this strong, infallible. I don't think all of them think that way, but that there's more of that with another professional man than there is when they're interacting with me. And I have been hired to coach leaders where the owner or the C-level guy has said, this guy, you get our problem, we describe the problem, and you clearly get it and are our best hope for a solution for this leadership issue we've got.
Mm-hmm.
This guy is a misogynist, he is racist, he is not likely to work with you, and we don't know how to tell him that, that we've hired you to help make him better. And I was like, just don't do that. Just tell him to interview me. I mean, we've got to figure out if it's a good fit or not anyway. And I walked in and met him and had just this heartfelt conversation about, man, they're telling me you're having a lot of problems. You must really be struggling, and just empathizing with him on, how can I help you? I want to help you. Yeah. And here's, a few skills I've got that might be useful to you. Do you want to work together? You want to take a shot at it? And I mean, at the end of a 45-minute conversation, he was like, absolutely, this could be exactly what I needed. And, the CEO was like, what did you do? I'm like, sorry, it's confidential. I'm just like, I just gave him an ear to listen. And as a coach, actually, that really is powerful, to be able to have an outsider who's not in the organization. I think if anyone is struggling in a leadership position, it really is powerful to hire a coach, even just for a season, and be like, I am stuck. Like, what do you see? Or can I just can I just let it all out, tell you all my frustrations and all of my insecurities, and help me? It's really powerful.
Well, and I like the fact that you went into the situation without holding any of those, like, they kind of set up limitations for you. I don't know if that limitations is the right word, but you didn't let those shape any assumptions for you to go in with. Like, you just went in there and you were like, nope, I'm going to approach it differently. And I think some problems that we have in our sector today is that people do go into a lot of situations with just assumptions, and based off those assumptions, they let that kind of create how they're going to move forward with conversations or just actions, and then it just causes all of these other challenges and obstacles. So I think just going in and, again, active listening and listening to understand and having open dialogue and crucial conversations is really important in some of these situations, especially with hiring new. I have that book as well. It's one of my favorite books.
It's really good.
I always try to promote that book because I really do feel like, as a society, especially with the technology that we have at the palm of our hands, we're losing track of communication, respectful communication. And we need to bring that back. And just like you said, everyone's human. Everyone bleeds the same color. And we just need to have those crucial conversations and bring respect back to the dialogue, because we've lost that.
One last thing on that topic. When you were talking, I was thinking the other really powerful thing to do is make one assumption, and that is assume good intent. Right? Like things happen and things go awry, and you're like, oh my gosh, he totally screwed me over, right? Like, now what am I going to do? And assuming that person intentionally harmed you or intentionally disrespected you. I coach all of my people, look, no matter what you see, go into this conversation assuming they had good intent. And that changes everything, right? And it really makes it easier to be a good listener.
So we do have one comment. It's been sitting here for a while, but our conversation has just been really good, and I didn't want to interrupt it. But Justin was like, authentic leadership to me, and not that anyone asked. I did ask Justin, is being the real you, but also not losing touch with your subordinates. If you become the type of leader that forgets what it's like being on the bottom of the totem pole, you will not be a true leader. You'll just be a boss. And we had that earlier in the conversation, and I kind of want to wrap up with this conversation around humility. And this is something that I also talked about recently with a friend of mine, where he was asking me some questions about like some of my frustrations within the space that I'm in. And I told him, I was like, I feel like a lot of people start out at a certain level, and once they start growing and get into more positions that have a little bit more responsibility or have a little bit more power, I guess, or responsibility, they start to lose sight of who they were. And this is something that Justin just pointed on, touched on. They start to lose sight of who they were before they got to that point. And sometimes it comes across really obvious to other people who are outside of their circle. Sometimes people call them out. Sometimes they don't get called out, and it just gets worse, and they get, I don't want to say big headed, but that's what it is.
That's what it is.
So, what is your advice in terms of like the power of humility? Like, how do you bring CEOs who might have this back to like normal size? If you get what I'm saying.
I think one of the things I start out with is identifying the inverse relationship between promotion and good emotional intelligence. Like it looks like this, right? The more you get promoted, the less emotional intelligence. That is just a general statistic that's easy to look up. And then talking them through, do you see that in your own life? Is there any disconnects that you're sensing? Because part of emotional intelligence is being aware of my emotions and then also being able to control those emotions. So I often will listen first, but whatever issues are coming up, I identify those. Almost always they're just indicators. They're not really the deep issue, right? And so I ask them to put that on a dashboard. That's just part of the dashboard here of your life. You fly off the handle in anger. That is just an indicator that something else is wrong. Let's dig into that. Sorry, I got off track there a little bit, but the other thing is like you were saying, or like Justin was saying, remembering where you've come from. I was in an interview the other day talking to someone about coaching them and what relationship we might move forward to, and negotiating that. And they asked where I came from. And I was like, well, when I was in college, I was the speaker of the student government. Like every Wednesday, I got together with about 100 student representatives, and I ran this incredible legislative meeting at my college campus in my early 20s. And I said, and it was paid position. It was awesome. And I loved it. But I was putting myself through school. So I cleaned toilets at the department store on Thursday nights to make up the difference. And I ran the business of the little shop that the battered women's shelter had on the town square on Saturdays for extra money. And I think one of the things that can be helpful is being upfront, like leading with that, being willing to say, that was a really wonderful growth opportunity in my leadership path. Sorry. And that was okay. Like that was, to me, even looking back, that was a beautiful expression of, I want this business degree. I want to be the first person to graduate from college in my family. And I'm going to do what it takes to get there. And to still be that as you lead people. Like if you're struggling with humility or even knowing what that is, then show up at the copy room the night before a big presentation. Staple those handouts with your staff, right? Like get in there, mix it up, go on the floor. Like do the work on the manufacturing floor for a day. Be willing, right? To humble yourself and get into someone else's shoes.
I
And then
love
you will
that.
be a better leader.
I think some of the best companies that I've worked for, and the reason why I loved working for them so much, is because to see the executives come into the, like you mentioned before, just to come in and actually help out. Like, what do we need help with today? Like, what are some of the obstacles that you're having? How's your, like, they knew even like the family issues that a lot of the employees were having, and, oh, what can you do? And then if there was something else going on where, the family needed outside help, they would set up like a donation thing or like an event just to help that employee through. And I think it's those little things, right? Like you mentioned earlier on in our conversation, those little things that make the employees want to go to bed at night, but then wake up excited to come to work in the morning and actually do a good job and be productive. So this
Exactly.
is such a great conversation, Heather. Do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I was going to say, back to that concept of your employees having joy coming to this place. Like maybe they love working with this manufacturing machine or robot or don't, but that person you just described who's like, man, John over here has a really serious personal situation. We want to come together and support him and help him. Like that's a place I want to come tomorrow morning, right? Because these people care. The leader is leading us in caring for one another. It's it's such a difference in atmosphere and culture when you have that kind of leadership.
Yeah, I love it. Well, Heather, we're coming up on time here, and I just wanted to ask you if you had any um, other like tips or best practices that I didn't ask about. Like, was there one question you were hoping that I would ask and I didn't ask? Um, is there something that you think we should dive into a little bit more?
Oh my gosh. Not off the top of my head.
Okay. Well, then, how about for our audience? If you had a big ask for our audience, what would your biggest ask be for them?
Oh, I think one research exercise I saw recently that I thought was really, I was surprised at how powerful it was in the results of the research. They challenged the people in an organization who they were really negative, and there was infighting. It was just a bad situation, right? There was just a lot of activity, a lot of toxicity. And they asked the people to do nothing, say nothing, but whenever someone passed by their desk or they passed someone in the hallway, to wish them good, like internally, not out loud, but to see that person and in their soul, in their mind, wish them blessings or wish them good, whatever their worldview accommodated, and then they would interview them day after day, week after week. Everything changed. Just that exercise of wishing others well, that person who wished them well, their entire experience changed to something more positive.
I like that.
Don't ask me why. I haven't dug that deep into the research, but I believe it because I've seen it happen in other spaces. And I love that as a very simple exercise. If you're having a hard time with negative thoughts, or you're just struggling with a difficult situation, just start wishing people well.
I like that. That's kind of similar to advice that I got a long time ago because I struggle with like clinical depression. So I always have to like do things like whether it's exercise, journaling, or complimenting. So I've also suffered from severe insecurity before all of this stuff happened. But one of the pieces of advice that I got, they were like, whatever you're feeling insecure about, compliment someone else on it. So like
Yes.
if you're having a bad hair day, like whoever you see, say you love their hair, or say you like their glasses, or say you like, their clothes or their outfit or their shoes, like, or say that they have a pretty smile or something, like try to compliment one person every single day and just see what their reaction is. And when I started doing that and I started seeing like how it made that other person's day just to be recognized for something, like it really felt good. And then you just forget about your own insecurity. So it was just cool how it changed my mindset and made me a better person. So that's kind of like similar to what you
it's really interesting.
That's cool. Well, Heather, I appreciate you so much for taking the time to speak with me today and like sharing your expertise. If anybody has any questions for you or they want to connect with you and see if you can help them with their leadership skills and also their company, what is the best way to connect to you and where can they find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn really easily at Heather Ball MBA. And then rockandkey.com is the name of my company. So there's lots of information there. And you can even grab a slot on my calendar if you wanted to do that. If you go to rockandkey.com.
Excellent. Well, Heather, thank you again. And to everyone that tuned in, I really appreciate your ears and your listening. Thank you for being such a great audience. And I hope you can come join us next weekend because we have two wonderful ladies from Flex Automation joining us. You know them as the Conveyor Cougar and the Conveyor Kitten, and I'm super excited to have them. So I hope everyone has a safe, warm, and wonderful weekend. Thanks, everybody. Have a great one.
Bye.
This episode of Mavens has been sponsored by Fresh Horizons Group. Fresh Horizons Group is a family-run company that was founded on the premise of helping organizations and businesses better tell their story through high-quality branded apparel and promotional items. Freshen up your brand by contacting Fresh Horizons today at freshhorizonsgroup.com.